Let's begin our second presentation. Please welcome Yijun Park, librarian in the Asian and Middle Eastern Division, serving as the moderator for our second presentation.
Hello, my name is Yujong Park. I'm a librarian in the Asian and Middle Eastern Division at the Library of Congress. I'm pleased to introduce our next presentation, The Unspoken History of the Korean War by Megan Harris and Owen Rogers. Megan Harris is a senior reference specialist for the Veterans History Project and has worked at the Library of Congress since 2007. Working with researchers and the general public, she coordinates access to VHP's archive of oral history and other materials pertaining to American veterans. Owen Rogers is a public historian and liaison specialist for the Veterans History Project. He is Vice President of Oral History in the Mid-Atlantic region. He also serves on the National Council on Public History's Government Historians Committee and the New Jersey Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation Museums Committee. Please welcome Megan and Owen.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's our honor to be here with you today and to share some of the history of the Veterans History Project and the voices contained within it. The timer's going. I promise to stay honest. So, the Veterans History Project collects the firsthand stories of veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces who served in the First World War through recent conflicts and at any point in between. And the Veterans History Project, we collect stories, but it has a fascinating story about its creation. And they say there's three kinds of stories that give you a hook. There's a stranger comes to town, there's a mystery, there's a quest. Veterans History Project has all three of those, and we're going to start with the prologue, where a stranger comes to town. So this is Representative Ron Kind from Wisconsin, and the first director of the Veterans History Project. And as a freshman member of Congress, Representative Ron Kind wrote, authored, and signed into legislation Public Law 106-380, the Veterans Oral History Project Act. And we'll talk a little bit about how we get these stories here. Megan will share the stories that we have collected, and then we're going to hear from some of the veterans themselves who have participated in this project. So, the journey to the Veterans History Project started off, about this time in the year 2000 at a Father's Day backyard picnic. And on Father's Day, we transition from the stranger comes to town to the mystery, where it's the year 2000, World War II veterans are passing away at a rate of about 1,000 a day. There's this cultural zeitgeist about World War II, where the United States has just finished commemorating the semi-centennial of the Second World War. Saving Private Ryan is in the theaters. People are talking to World War II veterans, and World War II veterans are answering them back for the first time in many families' lives. So Representative Ron Kind, just like quite a few fathers across the country that day, he is flipping burgers in his backyard. Over his shoulder, he hears his uncle and his father talking about their experiences in the United States military, and it's the first time he's ever heard these stories. So what does he do? He turns the gas off on the grill, he goes inside, he grabs the family video camera, and he records their stories, brings the ideas to Washington, D.C., and with unanimous bipartisan support, passes this law, passes the Veterans Oral History Project, and sets up an archive at the American Folklife Center to hold veterans' firsthand stories. And this is a very cool text request right here. This is from the fax cover sheet of a Congressional Research Service request where the member wants to set up a federal clearinghouse for veterans' video files, a memory file. They like to do this at the LC and want to discuss how it would work. So we have a delicate balance and responsibility. We collect, we curate, and we preserve, and we make accessible the firsthand stories of veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces. All of these steps are equally important. We've collected about 116,000 veterans' oral histories, original photographs, manuscripts, pieces of correspondence, and flat art from a range of United States deployments, peacekeeping actions, wars, and conflicts. This is just really the tip of the iceberg here. We've collected everything from here and everything in between. So here's some examples of what a Veterans History Project collection looks like. So right down here, I didn't know what this was until I came to the Library of Congress. This is a Betacam cassette. We no longer collect these, but we have very many of them, and they've all been digitized. And this is an example of a Vietnam veterans collection, where we have original correspondence, we have a transcript of an oral history, we've got the oral history itself, and some original photographs. We also, in addition to having a sizable amount of our collection online, all of our stories are made accessible through the American Folklife Center Reading Room. So how did the stories get here? So, I kind of wish, every now and then, I think particularly when it's a rainy day, I wish that this was like the Federal Writers Project and Megan and I could climb into a station wagon filled with batteries and peanut butter sandwiches and drive around and interview veterans all day. But that is not how it works. And part of the legislation was designed to create this intergenerational exchange of stories between volunteer interviewers, families, friends, colleagues, comrades, and have an opportunity to have a conversation with a veteran about their lived experiences and make sure that that conversation was not limited to the narrator and the interviewer, but could be shared with the 3.5 billion internet users that can access our collections. So this is actually an example right here of congressional activity. We have quite a few members of Congress who participate in this project, professional associations, like Oral History in the Mid-Atlantic region, students, volunteer organizations, a lot of individuals, and this is going to take a while to load because this is a fun little data project. This is actually a picture of where our collections have come from, and there are almost 1,500 organizations that have sat down with a veteran of the Korean War and heard a story of their service, recorded it, and sent it here to the Library of Congress. You can see that the largest group of donors here was a senator's office in Indiana, the Boy Scouts of America, Branson Veterans Task Force, the Library of Congress, Missouri Veterans History Project, National Court Reporters Association. And the Warhawk Air Museum. These are all examples of organizations that use library training materials and library training, conduct oral histories to our standards, collect original materials, and send them here for archiving and access. And if you are looking for perspectives on the Korean War, this is just, this is a slice of our holdings. This is what we've collected from Korean War veterans so far. It's nearly, so we've got 15,000 collections, video recordings, audio recordings, images, documents, a not forgotten digital feature, and as opposed to the collections that, we have all seen, either on A&E networks or through the National Archives and Records Administration, what we have here are opportunities to see unpublished materials. Stories you've never heard before, images you've never seen before, letters you've never read before. And it is, if you have an exciting book project or a film project, please talk to Megan and I after this because we would love to find more opportunities to get those materials to you. We do this all through the field kit where we had to wrangle about 100 years of varied service experiences and process them and coordinate their description and accession into the library with a one-volume resource, and the Field Kit does a pretty good job of that. There's examples of it on our website. We have learned a little bit about interviewing ourselves in the last few years. We accept virtual recordings, so if there's a veteran in your life who lives on the other side of the country or lives internationally, you can now record that oral history with them through any kind of audio or video chat software. And we also accept posthumous collection submissions. So if you knew a Korean War veteran, if there's a Korean War veteran in your life who is no longer with us but has original materials like photographs, letters, diaries, and an unpublished memoir, those can still have a home here at the Library of Congress. So like I mentioned, we have about 116,000 collections. The collection grows by about 100 to 300 new collections every month. And with that, Megan is going to share some of the materials that we've collected in the course of the last 23 years. And I am just as excited to see them as you are.
Hi, everyone. All right, so as Owen said, we collect a diversity of formats, including oral histories, but also original materials like letters, correspondence, diaries, and photographs. And so I wanted to give you a little taste of some of our individual stories in our collection, and give you a sense of the different formats that we collect. So to start, one of the letter collections that I find most personally compelling pertains to a veteran named Robert Barber, who was a Marine with the 1st Marine Division, which took part in the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. And correspondence is a really interesting primary source format because so often veterans were either censored by the military or self-censored, right? They didn't want to alarm their friends and families at home, the recipients of the letters, so they didn't really tell the full truth of what they were experiencing. And Robert Barber is really an exception to this. He told the unvarnished truth in his letters home to his mother. So his collection here at VHP includes about 50 letters that he wrote home to his mom, in which he graphically described the realities of combat. He talked about his frozen feet. He talked about hand-to-hand combat and the casualties that his unit had suffered. And throughout all of this, he says, "Don't worry, Mom, it's going to be just fine," which is a little jarring to read in the midst of all of these details about what he was experiencing. So through Barber's letters, we get a really on-the-ground perspective of someone who was experiencing one of the most infamous battles of the war. So in addition to correspondence collections, we also collect diary collections. Again, a format that I find really personally interesting because of the way that it is an unmediated sort of document. So unlike letters, right, diaries are a format in which were produced at the time that the veteran was experiencing the realities of war and was able to tell the truth too. So one of the original diary collections we have from the Korean War is that of Arthur Lorelli, who served in the Army with the 70th Infantry Battalion. And he explains that he was able to keep this diary. It's very comprehensive. I've excerpted 2 pages here, but they're 8.5 by 11 pages, about 150 of them. So it's quite large. And he explains that he was able to keep this diary by writing in several smaller pocket notebooks. He served in a tank battalion inside a tank, and so he was able to keep these smaller diaries, make entries, and then when they got to a rest stop, he would transcribe the diary entries into a larger notebook, which he had found in an abandoned house that they had been quartered. So as he says in the donation letter that accompanied the diary, "It is not from memory, but what I actually saw and other happenings in the company. A lot of the action was observed from my telescope from my gunner position inside the tank." So much like the Barber collection, the Lorelli diary really gives an unfiltered view into the realities of combat. And I should say, too, the realities of combat as experienced by a particular individual. So his diary, in fact, has a lot of language of the time and it should be taken as an individual perspective and nothing more or less than that. So in addition to letters and diaries, we also accept original photographs. One standout photograph collection was donated by Nicholas Phillips, another Marine who served with the 7th Marine Regiment. And his collection includes both black and white photos, like you see here. This is one of him standing with an impromptu Christmas tree, as well as color photographs that I believe were taken with slide film, and we digitized these from the original slides. And to me, it's really fascinating to see these brilliantly colored images. Typically, at least I personally think of the Korean War in black and white because so many images of the time were in black and white. But these, you get this amazing sort of Kodachrome color here of him serving with integrated units and of camp life. This is a British actress named Dawn Adams. So you can see these really wonderful images. And I think that in the case of these photographs, they really do provide a glimpse into the veteran service that you wouldn't see otherwise. That there's the saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I think that in the case of these photographs, that's really true. All right, now we're going to listen to some clips from some of our oral histories. Owen's going to be my Vanna White here. The first collection that we're going to listen to is that of Charles Rangel, who was a longtime U.S. representative who served in the Korean War and who was interviewed for VHP in 2013. He served in combat at Kunuri in November of 1950 and had some very memorable experiences. So we'll listen to him tell it in his own words.
It was September when we got up there. The temperature was dropping. We were singing songs about going home, and pretty soon we started thinking about Thanksgiving and the holidays and New Year's and singing and
Tell me about 30 November.
No, before we got there, it was so cold, so very cold. And we didn't have any winter clothes. So they told us there was a supply depot miles south of us that was supposed to bring the clothes up. And we went to the supply depot. It was like being in Macy's warehouse. Size 9 is over here. Well, extra large is here. What do you got down there? And everybody went back to the outfit, overdressed. You know, we may not have been ready for the Chinese, but we were damn sure ready for the winter, you know. Still thinking we were going home. And then I remember so well that someone had said, Sergeant Rangel, some of our people on patrol got captured, and they released them. And they were Chinese that captured them. Now, we had lost a lot of men on the way to North Korea. And I told the new people, I don't know where I got it, probably, I know I made it up. But in order to get them not to fall into the feeling that the war was over, I told them that the communist Chinese were going to parachute in. And then when I heard this story, I wondered whether that was an extension of the lie that I told to scare the hell out of the recruits, or whether Chinese really had parachuted in. Well, they didn't parachute in, but they damn sure were there. And for 3 days, they at nighttime would come out. And it was just a nightmare. They would blow the trumpets. They would talk to us in broken English. They would drop pamphlets on us. And they would remind us that this was a civil war and blacks have no business being there and you can't go to the resorts or the pool back home. And then they would name some of us, and then they would allow some of the people that we knew that were captured to talk. And they would tell us, you know, this is not our war. The Chinese didn't want to hurt us, and we should surrender and just go to Lieutenant Dunn and Captain Smith and just tell them that you don't want to fight this war against people who you don't know. None of it was effective, but very few of us got any sleep at night.
So I chose that clip for a couple of reasons. One is that it has the combination of pathos and also humor that you tend to see in VHP interviews. We're really interested, not specifically, or not necessarily just in troop movements and the experiences of combat, but really the experience of serving in war or serving in the military. And so it's a funny clip, but it also has some very deep messages, specifically in this case about what it was like to serve as an African American in the military during the Korean War. And I think it's important to point out that while many of our collections, arguably most of our collections from the Korean War do pertain to white men, we also have a diversity of viewpoints, which is a good entree to the next clip, which is a veteran named Regina Schiffman, who was a nurse with the Army Nurse Corps, who served in the operating room of a MASH unit. And her collection has both photographs as well as an audio interview that was conducted for VHP in 2004. And so here's a clip in which she talks about her living and working conditions while she was in Korea.
Tell us a little bit about your work there as a nurse.
It was fantastic. I never knew, as an operating room nurse, I never knew that technique could be carried out to the extent that it was in Korea, you know, in the field. Our hospital was a tent initially. Later they put it into a frame, but it was a tent with just canvas over the dirt for the floor. We had a pot-belly stove in there. The patients, we had, the stretchers were brought in to be put on horses. We didn't have operating room tables. Our enlisted personnel were really great, and they devised an actual scrub sink. They had a big tank outside it where they heated water, and we could actually scrub with not ice-cold water for surgery. And I did bring some pictures to show these things. Our living was really hard. In the wintertime, you'd wake up in your sleeping bag, and we slept on cots with sleeping bags, and look up and there were icicles because our potbelly stove, the line would be frozen and no heat. Then we didn't want to get out of the sleeping bags because then we had to go to the latrine, and there's a picture of that too. It's a tent where the seats would be frozen. That's a wild, mad awakening in the morning. Really got you going, though.
I guess.
Yeah. And overall, our food was relatively okay. We ate out of mess kits, and I think one thing, like our shower broke down, so that for 6 months we strictly were washing out of our helmets. And I think one thing that really strikes me is that you really learn to appreciate the very simple things in life, like being able to take a bath, being in a bed, being able to drink milk. We got that powdered stuff or whatever it was over there. And there was a picture there where I went to Tokyo to meet a regular Army board. I had TDY, and that was like in heaven, because I was able to do these things and realize that, you know, what these things are simple, and, you know, I've been missing them. They had we really had a wonderful group there. It was like one big family. We were out in the fields not near any town or anything like that. There were civilians not allowed, except for, we had some young boys cleaning for us, and that was about it.
So one note about this collection, she has some wonderful details in there about what it was like to serve at the MASH unit. The audio is not terribly crisp, possibly you heard that. Hopefully you could understand a little bit about it, but it's important to note that, as Owen said before, we do not have professionally recorded oral histories. All of these oral histories were recorded by lay people, essentially. That the idea is of the project that anyone can participate, any veteran, but also anyone who may not have some training in oral history. So that's just one reason why sometimes it's a little hard to hear the veteran or see the veteran, and you have to dig a little bit deeper into our recordings. So the final veteran story that I wanted to share is that of Gene Takahashi, who was a Japanese American who was incarcerated with his family at an internment camp in Arizona during World War II. He enlisted in 1945, hoping to get in on that war, but missed the chance to serve, and was called up for the Korean War and served with an all-African American unit in combat. So we'll hear a clip from his oral history.
At this point, as a matter of fact, it was March 1st. I was leading my platoon up a hill when I was hit by a Chinese machine gun in my right femur, and it stopped me dead in my tracks. I dropped, couldn't move. They couldn't come get me because of the machine gun fire, so I strapped my belt around my leg to stop the bleeding, and had to wait until things quieted down enough that they could drag me out of the line of fire. And when they did, they pulled me back to a tank, strapped me on the back side of a tank. My platoon gathered all around me, and I had been saving a bottle of scotch throughout all this time, really. And I opened up at this occasion. We all had a drink on me, and I left the platoon at that point. And the tank took me back to what was later called the MASH unit hospital, and I was treated there, and flown over back to Tokyo General Hospital. It was things are pretty hazy at this point. I was pretty well drugged up, and but I do recall a Nisei soldier appearing in front of me at camp, not at camp, but in Tokyo, and asking me if there's anything that he could do. I thought for a while, and I said, as a matter of fact, there is. I was wondering if you would mind going to the PX and buying something for me. And I handed him what dollars I had on myself, and I said, I described a watch, square watch, black face, that asked him if he would buy me one of those, which he did, returned with it. And he did a very good job of choosing a good watch, because this is the watch that I have on right now, which is like 52 years later, and it still runs fine. So I treasure this watch and its memories.
So I think we're running a little late on time, so I'm just going to run through a couple of additional slides having to do with how researchers find our collections. So we have a series of online presentations that we call Serving Our Voices, and it's a curated set of collections on a particular theme. We have one that was done a few years ago on the Korean War and looks at veterans who served on the front lines in support roles and then also in the air. And in addition to our online collections or online presentations, we have about 75% of our overall holdings, so overall meaning 116,000 collections. About 75% of them have some online component that is viewable online. And you can search our holdings by conflict, by unit, by service, location, by gender, race, and other search facets. How this material is used, we have researchers who come on site from around the world to use our collections here at the library. And then we have users, again, from around the world who access our collections online. And they're used in everything from documentaries to PhD dissertations to genealogy work, museum exhibits. We've had collections that were used in theater and dance performances. And then for monographs, like a recent book by a historian named David Klein, who looked at African Americans who served during the Korean War and wrote a book called Twice Forgotten. So this is just a snapshot of our online presentation called Serving Our Voices. And then this is a snapshot of our online search facets. And if anyone is doing research or is interested in using our collection for research purposes, I would definitely encourage you to get in touch with us. We can help facilitate online searching as well as go through the ins and outs of the search interface. We recently, last November, migrated to a new platform for our websites and our database, and there are some tips and tricks that we can help you with if you're interested in using our collections. So I just wanted to say thank you, and we look forward to taking some questions. Thanks again.
Thank you for the presentation. Now we will take questions. As a reminder, you can raise on your hand if you are on the floor. If you are on Zoom, please type your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your presentation and the project, it's an amazing. I was amazed by the human desire of recording. Even it was a battlefield. It was an amazing to launch these projects. I have two questions. Number one is you already started to answer to that about how much or these material were digitized so that the researcher can access globally. Maybe particularly the formats of journals and the letters, and it's very, very tough job because based on the volume that you have. That's the first question. And second question, what about the voice of subaltern? I know that this is a national, and this is about the veterans, United the American, all the citizens who participated, who volunteered in this war. But what about the collateral damage? For example, the battlefield. There's a people, civilian, or a lot of women and wards who were vulnerable, and then even forced to enforce the labor or even sexual slavery, like comfort women, and happened to be I was volunteering on that issue for a long time. So, is there any kind of niche that you're thinking in the future about expanding to this area, in response to the maybe decolonization, which is sort of a keyword nowadays? So that's my two questions. Thank you.
Great questions, both of them. I think the first one is maybe a little easier to answer, so I'll tackle that first, and then Owen and I can flip coin as to who wants to answer the second question. So the first question was, I think, about digitization and the volume of that. And you're absolutely right that we have, as Owen said, we have about 100 to 300 collections coming in every month, which is a lot, which is wonderful. Initially the project was conceived of as only a 5-year, not to exceed project. So the idea, I think, was that we would collect all of the stories of World War II veterans and then stop, and that would be it. And so we have luckily been very successful, and we have such a volume of incoming collections as well as a backlog of collections that have already been gathered. And we share digitization resources with the rest of the library. And so it is an uphill battle to continually put new incoming collections and our existing collections up online. And I think that there is especially an expectation of that for not only researchers, but also for our participants. We are a very we're unique within the library in that our participants care very deeply about seeing their family members' stories online. They are not typical donors that you see elsewhere in the library, and so there is somewhat of an expectation that material be digitized very quickly and with the push of a button. And so we are definitely working hard to digitize as much as we can and facilitate research online, but it is an uphill battle for sure. As for your second question, it's a really great question that, frankly, I had anticipated getting in this venue. I'll share my thoughts, and then Owen can chime in. What you're describing, all of those topics are really important, and I, both in this context as well as in general, wish that we could collect more than we do, because there are so many experiences. And what I love most about this project is that it does reflect the human experience. And
Is there a train coming?
I know. It did sound like a train. Who's to say that this slice of the human experience is the only one that should be gathered? Unfortunately, we are very much tied to the congressional legislation that created our project, which stipulated very clearly that we only collect the stories of American veterans. And so we are tied to that and must adhere to that. As for expansion, I honestly don't believe that there would be an expansion beyond that to include, as you said, the collateral damage of war, different perspectives. I think that for the foreseeable future, we are going to definitely be constrained to only collect the stories of those who served in U.S. uniform. That said, one of the things that we're trying really hard to do is represent a wide variety of perspectives within that mission, right? So it's really important that we hear from as many different veterans as we possibly can with as many different perspectives. And I'll turn it over to Owen.
Absolutely. So, Megan, I concur with Megan. These are meaningful stories, and we are bound to a specific congressional mandate. However, both Megan and I are public historians, and we are all about taking institutional resources, and in addition to communicating the inspiring stories that we've collected, we want to inspire other archives and other institutions to collect oral histories using our collecting methods. So in this sense, the Veterans History Project Field Kit, the interview questions, and even best practices for individual volunteers to record oral histories outside of a studio, using phones and tablets. We would be able to provide training, consultation services, and liaise with other organizations who can collect these meaningful stories. And, although we wouldn't be able to have them here in our archive, we would do everything we can professionally to help lift up another archive and share some of the knowledge that we've accumulated in coordinating a user-sourced oral history project.
I think there was a gentleman over here who had a question.
Excuse me. So just to further define your response, is the congressional mandate limited to combat veterans or all any experiences?
Any experience.
So, for example, my dad was on the bird expeditions in Antarctica, and he left quite a lot of stuff to me, Brownie photographs and news articles and things like that. And I was just wondering if that would be something of interest.
Yes, absolutely. We collect the stories of anyone who served in U.S. uniform, and I think that there has been an emphasis on combat veterans in the past, in general, as well as within our own project. And it's really important to us that all experiences are encompassed. And so anyone who was designated a veteran by the VA, essentially. So yes, absolutely, we'd be interested in that narrative.
I think and it's funny, the anecdote that I usually share was that, we want the perspective of the airmen in Alaska as much as we want the story of the Marine in Incheon. And it's funny, the other day a member of Congress came in with a collection from his father, who had been that airman in Alaska during the Vietnam War and had been reticent to share his story because of his own value judgment about his service. Thinking to himself, well, I am not a combat veteran. Who wants to hear my story? And we absolutely do. So, yes.
Thank you. We will take a question from the Zoom user.
Thank you very much. The first question is for Owen and Megan, and then there is one general question, please. Does the Veterans History Project provide training for volunteers to get oral histories?
Yes, indeed we do. So we're all about pedagogy and preservation here. And we have 2 workshop models, in one sense, to help volunteer interviewers conduct oral histories, collect them successfully, and then transition them into an archive. We can either provide you with a flexible Zoom training, or if you're in the DC area, an in-person training. For groups of 25 or more, 25 to 60 specifically, we do have standing contracts with the American Folklore Society and the Oral History Association, the 2, I would say, eminent oral history organizations in North America. And what we would be able to do is coordinate an oral history workshop for you. If you would like to know more, just please email us at VOHP, that's Victor Oscar Hotel Papa, at loc.gov, and we can talk about different workshop options that would help establish y'all as a connector for the Library of Congress.
Thank you. We will take one more question, if there is any. Sure.
A general question, please. I would like to ask a question regarding United Nations peacekeeping force, in which my mother, who was a part of the force with the Ethiopian battalion. Could you please advise me on this, and if it is something that might be of interest? It seems that the symposium is only about U.S. and Korean diaspora. Thank you.
So while we wouldn't be able to, just for clarification, this is your mother served with the Ethiopian Armed Forces?
I think a peacekeeping mission in Ethiopia. So
okay.
That would be in scope within Veterans History. This symposium is about the Korean diaspora and U.S.-Korean relations. But our project, as Owen said before, covers from World War I all the way through more recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we cover the full scope of the 20th century, and I would want to know a little bit more about this patron's mother's experiences. Offhand, it sounds very interesting and like it would be in scope, but when we're approached by someone who's interested in donating either an oral history or other material, we tend to want to find out the specifics, both about the collection as well as that veteran's actual service. So that would be, we want to know a little bit more.
Thank you for the great questions, and thank you, Megan and Owen.
Okay.